Well, thank you for having me, everyone. When I told my wife what I was doing today, she said it was really brave of me to go into a room of farmers after the weather we had last year. So hoping that 2026 brings some changes for us. There do seem to be some changes, and we will spend some time just kind of talking about the trends, and we'll do a little educational piece. I always like to end with questions as well, so I'm hoping to save a few minutes for questions at the end. Sometimes, if you ever watch severe weather coverage, the meteorologist could just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. So we're going to try and consolidate that down so we make sure we get some questions on the floor here. So again, the outlook for 2026, some of the things that we're looking at here. First off, where we are now, I think a lot of us obviously know how bad the drought has been in parts of the state, and that is something that we have to consider here as we're rolling into the winter and early spring months. Some areas, though, had some significant rains. We had areas in southern Illinois down by I-70 that had some pretty heavy rains early on. There's been some other pockets of heavy rain. It was kind of a year for 2025 where there were ups and downs all over, and it turned even into where your field might have done really well, and your friend down the road might have had some really terrible years. So kind of a weird year, especially here in the central Illinois area for that. But the drought overall is a bit of a problem here, and I think that's something that we'll have to talk about coming up a bit. The La Nina influence also seems to be wrapping up. To be totally transparent, I don't feel that we've had much influence from La Nina in a traditional sense. There's been other factors that have played a role in that, but we're anticipating a transition to El Nino, and we'll spend a little time talking about that. The last El Nino we had was a little hit in 2023, 2024, and then the most recent strong one was 2015, 2016 for that. But we've had a stretch here since 2020 where we've just had La Nina kind of hanging in there like a hair in a biscuit. It just won't go away. It sticks around. Great analogy, right? Hopefully we didn't have breakfast this morning like that. So this is the drought monitor update that came out. In fact, the new one actually probably came out just a few minutes ago. There's really not going to be much change on that here. And you can see that the moderate drought has expanded across a large part of the state. The bullseye has been right here in Champaign-Urbana. You're in the drought ground zero in Illinois in this area. We're in extreme drought. I talked to Dr. Trent Ford from the Illinois State Water Survey, and I asked him, what does it take for us to get to exceptional drought? And basically what he mentioned is we may actually already be there, but to be an exceptional drought, we have to have those impacts from agriculture to push us over the line. Other than that, right now, the grass is brown. It's been brown for a while. It's winter. It's traditionally a drier time of year. And we've not actually hit that level exceptional. We may not. It's something that you tend to see that in California and out in the West where there's wildfires and things. But regardless, we're in a situation where here in Champaign-Urbana, we are over 13 inches down from rain since this time last year. Over a foot of rain short. Soil moisture profiles are abysmal. We're at the bottom level here. And some folks think, oh, the snow we got. We got quite a bit of snow in November, December. That helps out. Maybe we get more. A lot of you probably are familiar with the inch of rain makes 10 to 12 inches of snow. Really averages about 13 inches. So we had about 18 inches of snow so far this winter, and it's only come out to be about 1.25 inches of actual liquid water content. So I always like to say, if you want the snow to catch up in the drought, we need like 170 inches of snow to make that happen. I don't think anyone wants to deal with that, unless you're around in the 70s and you love that. Anyone here, 70s? We always hear about that. So we definitely are looking at that as a concern here. Of course, the La Nina pattern that we've been in typically is a little more active for us, but we've been dry through the fall. It was a stretch of some dry weather. For those who aren't familiar, we call it ENSO. It's the El Nino Southern Oscillation. Basically, it's just a pattern that appears in the waters of the Southern Pacific. So you can see highlighted there in off the coast of South America and the Pacific. And that's the area we look at. La Nina means that cooler waters are upwelled in that area. And then El Nino means warmer there. So that kind of gives us a baseline. And how does that affect us? Well, maybe we can describe it this way. If we've got a big swimming pool, there's all kinds of different patterns. The ENSO pattern typically is the biggest driver for us, and we typically experience that the most in the winter. We still see impacts spring, summer, and fall. But it's like if you jumped into a pool and did a cannonball. Maybe you've got 5 of you to do a cannonball, and the ripples spread across the pool and impacts downstream. So that will impact the jet stream on the northern hemisphere and kind of move things around. There's other patterns that are smaller ripples, smaller cannonballs. Some of them might be little pebbles, but they all just kind of make some noise, and we've got to try and see through the noise. But we know that the ENSO pattern is typically the biggest pattern here. So normally for La Nina, look at that. See, a typical La Nina pattern, we're supposed to be wet around here, and we really haven't been this one. This has been a little bit of a weirder situation for us. However, I do think we'll actually see the La Nina pattern kick in really from here on through the rest of winter into early spring. A lot of times as well, it's not like when you jump in your truck and you start the engine and it runs. These patterns aren't like that, right? They take time to respond. It takes time. There's a ton of energy in the atmosphere. It's so big, so we see those effects maybe a little delayed behind that. A great way to think of that is when you get a cold front in the summertime, you got to wait till the next day till you really cool things off a bit more. Wintertime, those cold fronts yesterday was awful, terrible. The wind, it was like that front hit and it dropped. We're thinking more of those, it takes time for these big patterns to change because we're talking on the global scale here, but typically that jet stream is a bit more active out of the north. Now, we have had that activity out of the north, those clipper systems diving on in, but there's not moisture here. Drought begets drought. It's a cycle, a downward spiral, and so there's not really been a lot of moisture available for those clipper systems to put down some rains in recent months around here. I do think that changes. Something that will help us is the warm Gulf of Mexico, the warm waters of the Atlantic, does help to surge moisture northward, and that's got some signs that maybe that'll play a role for us here moving forward. But that's typically La Nina. Of course, we know La Nina is rough for agriculture around the world. You tend to see a lot of big swings in different markets and things like that. The flip side is El Nino, and this may be where we head. Unfortunately, El Ninos do look a little drier typically around here, and this does focus on the winter months. We see less variation and less effects from it in the spring, summer, and fall months. There's still some, but those winter months is what we see, but that's kind of the baseline of when we talk about those patterns here. I did pull up some years to show recent years in boxes that stood out. Again, 2020 through 2023, we were in La Nina. We kind of had a little break there in 23, 24. We're back here 24, 25 into 26 now. But the pattern that's moving forth is kind of switching us back in the direction. If you're involved in that at all, first off, our extended outlooks, actually from this point, I've been really impressed with them. This is the 8 to 14 day outlook temperature-wise. That's a very La Nina pattern to me. Here in central Illinois, our La Ninas, if you look at the data, it says it should be average temperature. However, it usually is not. La Ninas are big temperature swings up and down. If we do a little math in here, take the average of 49 and 51. That's 50, right? But if you also take the average of 25 and 75, that is also 50. So La Nina years are typically near normal temperatures, but we see those big swings up and down. We had some big swings down in November and early December. We've had some warm weather and severe weather even around here with those big upswings, and we'll probably continue that, but we're finally locking in, I think, for a couple of weeks of some actual winter, and that 8 to 14 day outlook looks that way. And then this here screams La Nina to me. Still in it, wetter than normal. We've got those storm systems passing through the area and pulling that Gulf moisture north. Maybe we're going to end up on the colder side, though. So the potential there through the rest of the month into February that things will look wetter and maybe a little snowier. I think we all know, though, how finicky those winter systems can be, right? It could be a cold rain or a wet snow in varying parts of the state, and you might get a little mix in between. But there's some hope, I think, here in the near term. And we look at the seasonal outlook. Again, see how it's near normal for January through March, but we're firmly in that La Nina pattern here. So I guess the pointer doesn't point at the TV. You can see to the north up is Sioux Falls, Minneapolis. There's the colder air. It comes down, right? And the warmer air kind of swoops up the east. We're in the middle of that battleground, so we'll see those swings up and down continue here. The seasonal outlook, this is what I'm really hopeful and optimistic of. Again, we're so far down in rain, though, the big question is, will it be enough? And I'm not so sure it will be, because not only do we have to get our average rainfall, but we got to get a lot on top of that. The seasonal outlook has been this way, and it's tended to be that we've been thinking the second half of January, which we're entering into now, and then February and March might bring some rains, which, one, help with the drought, two, put some moisture in the ground, and three, even help the water tables around here. I've got some folks in Douglas County who've told me that their wells are dry, and they're pumping in water to trucks and trucking it out to the farms from the cities down there. So I've had a few conversations like that. So I do have some hope here as we move on forth with the seasonal outlook. And some of that is because I think that La Nina pattern finally is settling in. The jet stream brings those systems on through and should bring some wetter weather here, except for your farm field, right? It's always the neighbors that get the wetter weather, not you. This is another graphic here. It shows the drought trends forecast for the Climate Prediction Center, and they're really bullish on things here. They suggest that removal of drought conditions is likely by the end of March for all of our area, except for that tan area. It says improvement. That's where we've got the severe and extreme drought, but we're still seeing improvement. We'll see. Again, the other thing about the drought monitor is usually it's reactive. The conditions happen and then they declare it. You guys, you folks here are seeing the drought's impacts firsthand, and it takes a week or two before the data then shows what's happening there. So there's a lot of optimism there. I do have some hope. We'll see what happens. I think it's going to be wetter, but again, we're in a big pickle with that drought situation. The other thing that stood out to me is down in Terre Haute. If any of you were down in southeast central Illinois, Jesse Walker posted something a week or two ago. The last 6 years down there have been below normal for rainfall for him. Most of the years were maybe an inch or two, but this year has hit them hard, and I think a lot of us have experienced that. But this here is a product of the idea that the La Nina pattern finally picks up, brings those rains, maybe snow as well, and helps with things here. So that's what we got. Here's the soil moisture anomalies from the 13th. Again, the drought is also problematic, not just here, but even down into the deep south. They're experiencing those drought conditions. We didn't have any help from the tropics this past year. Especially when we get late in the summer, we kind of need that help. You know, the pattern turns a little stagnant around August. Usually you get some surges of moisture, get a tropical system to come in. If that tropical system's coming into Texas, Galveston, Corpus Christi, usually it's going to swing north our direction, as long as the jet stream can swoop it that way. Sometimes they stall out, but that's where we're looking for something to bring relief for us. You can see down there, southeast Texas is dry as a bone. That's because they didn't get any tropical moisture help this year. There was nothing that helped them, and so we're hoping that that pattern maybe changes. Of course, we know what we know what tropical systems mean, right? That's hurricanes and devastation and things like that usually, but we kind of need that help, especially in the mid-late summers. We didn't get that this year. And then here's an anomaly change as we look from October 31st. Things, especially in Arkansas and Mississippi, Tennessee, Louisiana, have really dried out down there. They've been just getting the worst. We're kind of seeing the southern part of the state catch up. There's really not been any change in central and northern because we're already dry. So we wouldn't expect a change if there hasn't been much help on that. But this is going to be the interesting thing to me about that change from La Nina to El Nino. The blue bar represents the La Nina forecast probabilities. The red is El Nino. The gray is neutral. Obviously, there's an inflection point between La Nina and El Nino, right? It's not like flipping a light switch. You spend time on this side, then you're in the middle, and you transition to the other side. You don't skip that middle area. And that's where I think there's going to be some questions here. Neutral patterns actually aren't terrible for agriculture. They aren't terrible for rain here either. And you can see the official forecast for the bottom there is the 3-month code. So DJF, December, January, February, and onward down the line there. Brings by the summertime the probability of El Nino increasing. Maybe we're rolling through the summer plant still in the neutral phase, which I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that helps us out because once we get to El Nino, maybe next winter looks a little drier for us. If we sit in neutral, that's favorable, I think, to get some rains back in the area. Some of the forecast guidance has been, again, really aggressive, taking us from La Nina to El Nino in a really big swing. I'm a little hesitant to believe that it's going to happen that fast, and some of the other guidance here, I should say, I had that backwards here, actually. This is the official guidance from NOAA. This is some of the recent forecast models. So you can see the change. The official forecast has been a little quicker getting El Nino in and La Nina out. Some of the guidance, maybe a little slower transition, and I think that slower transition would help out with us. But as we do get that transition, again, switching from La Nina to neutral to us stands out. Some of the conversation we've been having at the TV station and the weather team is those are usually patterns that you can also get severe weather pretty quickly. So we're kind of interested in March to see what happens around here as we enter that neutral pattern. The faster we go, I think the more abrupt and the more, I don't want to say crazy, but a fast change to me doesn't seem like it's something that will help, right? We kind of want to gradually ease our way into El Nino if that's where we are in fact heading. And I kind of think maybe we will a little bit more slowly move that way than some of the forecast guidance has been recently. But again, we only have to be right half the time, and we keep our jobs. So there's that. So these are some of the expectations I have for our area. Again, and this is generally central Illinois, but it's really statewide here, right? Weather patterns don't just stop at one county and go into the other. So this, you can consider this a statewide thought here. I think the drought is going to remain, unfortunately. And I know droughts, the big concern is when we roll into the winter months in drought, winter is our driest time of year around here. We have had some really wet winters before, but I think that drought is still going to be there. It's just going to linger like the in-laws at the holidays, right? They say bye 5 times, but they don't actually leave. there's probably going to be still some risk of that moving on forth. But the next couple of months are going to be really critical. And if we can get some beneficial rain that doesn't fall all in 2 hours, the more we get those slow, steady rains, the better that things go here. And there is some hope and some opportunity for that. And then the other thing that sticks out, we've been kind of in this La Nina pattern. Something that stood out to me is 2010 to 2012 were double-dip La Nina years. And then we rolled into neutral on our way to El Nino. And I think we all know what 2012 was, right? Now, we didn't start 2012 in drought. That evolved pretty quickly, though, as we headed to the spring and summer. We're already there, and so that's a concern that I have, is if we can't get some rain, then this summer would be really brutal out there. I do think as well, and you might nod your heads in agreement or disagreement, whatever, I do think that the genetics has helped quite a bit with drought resistance, and so that's been good, where I think there's bigger problems that can emerge, but obviously you don't want to go through a whole spring, emergence and through the cycles and whatnot without any rain. Like, we need that rain badly, so that's something that we'll have to watch. The spring, I think actually the spring could end up being a little cooler, though, with that slow transition to neutral. And there's been some years where we've had some folks that have been out planting in March, and some of you may have done that even this past year with some corn. A little concerned that there could be some freeze risk. We tend to see that. The last time we had a freeze risk, if I remember right, was in 2018, when we kind of entered into neutral. And when I say that, I mean in the month of May, where we went below 32 degrees. So that may be something that's a little more of a concern to me this year. Again, the La Nina influence, even though we're starting to transition out, we're still under that umbrella. Should have some wet weather here the next few months. Probably the next 3 or 4 weeks have some good opportunities for some rain, snow, winter mischief of some sort out there. Again, temperature profile makes all the difference in that. But there's some hope that some moisture will come here. And then, again, because we're not so sure, and I have some hesitations about how quick we can get to El Nino, there is some uncertainty after May. A faster change maybe isn't as favorable than a slower, gradual change in, but we'll see. And we may end up needing some help from another pattern we look at, the Madden Julian Oscillation. And that just has to do with, it's another one of those ripples in the pond, right? Ripples in the pool. If we can get some help from that and we end up in a favorable phase, then that's just going to help things out here, especially over the next few months. It seems like we're entering in that more active phase here. And then we should have an earlier start to severe weather around here, too. I really do think that March has a chance to bring a couple of severe weather events in the region. That may be southern Illinois, that could be central Illinois, that could be Iowa, Missouri, but that pattern is favorable for that. So we'll watch. How am I doing on time? Okay, we're good. And then maybe we do end up a little quieter, especially if that El Nino enters faster. Maybe things are a little quieter May and June. Now, I think we all know it takes one big wind event through your farm fields, when the corn is up and blows it over. But maybe the odds are a little less favorable for that here, so we'll keep an eye on that. And then the summer months there, I've got that tab. Again, some of the guidance is really optimistic. We get rain. I'm still really skeptical that we get enough. If we do, then fantastic. That's great news. But I just have some concern that that drought is going to still be in the area or close by. Another example, even in the Rockies, and this is something they look at for severe weather, Colorado is on one of its lowest snowpacks. I mean, the ski resorts aren't even open right now. You kind of got to get some moisture out there to help the Great Plains and build things downstream. Thankfully, our moisture we look for is usually going to come from the Gulf, and that is warmer than normal, really warm. Great Gulf beach vacations if you get too tired of the cold coming the next few weeks. So that will help, but we can be out of drought here, but if drought's surrounding us, then we kind of, it's like the gates, the walls are closing in on us, and that may be something we just have to watch. So we need some help from the MJO, the Madden Julian Oscillation, but we also need help from the tropics. And if we can go through the tropical season in neutral, that helps our odds quite significantly. El Nino is unfavorable for tropical systems. We see more active tropical patterns for hurricanes and tropical storms in La Nina. We've had some pretty active years. This last year was actually really active in the tropics, but we didn't have any landfall strikes in the United States from hurricanes, which that's a good thing. But again, we need that moisture to come our way. I do think the disease potential also could be up a little bit. There was quite a bit of it this past year, which surprised me, even in spite of the dry weather. But when we did get storm systems, they came, they came speeding from the south and heading north and east, and so we had some issues with some bean rust and things like that out there. That's something that will probably be a concern to me as well, even with the dry weather. It just sticks out to me as, I don't know, it's one of those hunches I have. I've had hunches and been wrong, but I just am thinking that's going to be something that we watch. And then maybe 2023 might be a potential baseline year, but I'm always hesitant to say that there's a baseline year because everyone's going to experience something different. And all of us have had that different experience this past year. And then, of course, that transition. How fast are we going to move to El Nino? That will be something to watch closely because if we can hang out in neutral, that helps us in the summertime months for things here. Here's a couple of the quick worldwide trends. Brazil and Argentina kind of have some drought risk as they go to neutral from the weak La Nina that we're in. And the peak, they're in summer down there, right? They're having a great warmth. You know, they're in the peak growing season, but it tends to look a little less favorable for them with the corn and soy, and so global yields from them may be a little bit lower. That's not a bad thing, right? Less supply, maybe that helps with the prices to get them up, right? We don't want those big things. So we'll see what happens down there, but there's been some chatter about that. But then as we go into April and June, as we enter that neutral, again, a neutral pattern is more stable, kind of hanging out there. That tends to be more favorable for northern hemisphere planting, and the emergence season's a little more positive. The wetter seasons, though, kicks in the southern hemisphere in those drought-affected areas. So what we may see is it's a little lower for them, but then as they start planting and heading to next growing season in the southern hemisphere, maybe they're going to have bigger yields for next year's plant for them down there. And so that'll be something as we kind of look the next 18 months at the markets and see what comes from that. Because the earlier El Nino arrival is less good for corn, a little better for soy, but the southern hemisphere dryness should linger but fade a little bit, again, setting them up for success, whereas we may have some heat risk from that. It seems like we've just been having heat all the time anyways around here. We'll see how much. Again, that I think is dependent on the El Nino change. And then the October, December, by then I think El Nino should be here. So when that happens, maybe there's some higher yields globally, and so that, of course, would be 2027 that we spend some time with markets and things of that. Just got to be 50% right, and then they'll bring me back for another time, so there's that. All right, so that's kind of what I got to present here. If we got a few minutes for questions, don't we? So if there's any questions, 5 minutes or so, give or take.
Okay, since we're on YouTube and the Facebook, as I like to call it, we want to make sure we use microphones. Anything for Jacob?
You can complain too, that's okay.
God, I have a weather question for Jacob. When was the last time we had just a good old-fashioned El Nino or La Nina? It seems to me, observationally, that they always seem to be weak.
Yeah, El Nino-wise, the strong one was, what I have, 2015, 2016. It's been a while since we've had that. We hit moderate La Nina. In fact, I've got the graphic here. I can just pull it up.
Probably shouldn't be. I'm not wishing for one.
No. Because it's been kind of weird the last several years. So the strength of it also is going to play a role in that. But the last time we had a really strong El Nino, 2015, 16, 2023, 2024, briefly hit strong, but we kind of touched it and dove back the other direction. So that's the list if you're interested. Where were the late 70s? Where's all the snow? Do we have that on there? There we go. Weak El Nino. 77, 78, 79, 80. So maybe next year we'll be in weak La Nina and get 50 inches of snow again. That'd be nice. No? Disagree?
Not on the weekends.
No.
Any questions?
One over here.
Over here. Kelsey, please. Okay, go ahead.
I'm just curious, what's hurricane season look like?
So the official forecasts come out in the next month or two. If we are in neutral, I think that's going to help send some tropical systems in to the Gulf. Again, we don't like that for our Gulf Coast friends, but that's where we really need some help. We had 0 tropical influences this past year. If we race straight into El Nino, the faster we go into El Nino, the lower the chances are for tropical help. The reason being is because the trade wind's kind of reversed. There's a lot more wind shear in El Nino in the southern Atlantic. Or I should say the tropical region is the Atlantic. When there's a lot more wind shear, that will tear tropical systems up, prevents them from forming. La Nina years tend to have less wind shear. That way the engine for hurricanes can just keep going undisturbed. And we saw that. We had some pretty strong hurricanes this past year. 3 Category 5s in the Atlantic. Thankfully, none of them hit the United States. Of course, we know what happened down in Jamaica. So if we can kind of stay neutral, that will help. But the faster we go into El Nino, the less favorable it will be for tropical systems to push moisture north. As warm as the Gulf is, though, the Gulf is putting off a lot of water vapor, so it's easier for our mid-latitude cyclones to swing through, sweep that up, and I think that will happen here in the next few months. So it's not the end-all that we don't get any tropical moisture help from hurricanes and sending that northward, but if you're looking for that, you want to hold off on El Nino until the end of the season, if that makes sense.
I have one question that came in via text message.
Text
so here
message,
you go.
wow.
Are you familiar with the Dakotas this year and the weather they had up there? I'll ask the question because
Go
the
for
question is, did the Dakotas have that good of weather last year to justify the bump in yields? They had some pretty good yields this year.
So I think some of it had to do, I forecast in Illinois, first off, for they're watching. So, you know, we could spend all day talking everywhere. I think they didn't really have much drought. In fact, if we go back and look at the drought monitor, I gotta go forward in that one. So, you know, the soil moisture anomalies up there were a little better, and you know they weren't hit or hurting. So up in the northern plains, that kind of helped them out a little bit. And then, did I go too far for the drought monitor? Did I skip by it? There, one more before. Nope. Where is it? I did it at the beginning, didn't I? There it is. Oh, that's just the state, of course. I think they just had better moisture, and a lot of times those pattern changes kind of keep the system out there. I mean, did anyone get any rain in August, September at all? I mean, there was dry for a long period of time around here. Out in the Great Plains was getting their fair share of it, though. But that drought, if I zoomed that map out, there's quite a large amount of the United States that has those drought conditions, so I don't have the full answer for the Dakotas. You know, isn't this the Illinois soybean?
I think that was a virtual question.
Yeah,
so.
I know. I'm just teasing. Thanks
Yeah.
for being on.
Oh, one question right there in the middle.
Middle.
And Darby's coming to you
Well,
behind you.
Well, that's coming. Did the hurricanes underachieve in what was predicted, or were they all just in the ocean and we just never knew they were around?
Does anyone remember Hurricane Andrew when it hit Homestead, Florida, back in the day? Everyone remembers that, and they think that was the worst year for hurricanes in a long time down there. But the thing is, that was the only hurricane that year to hit the United States. After that, it was a pretty quiet season. So there's always a visibility aspect to that. You know, Jamaica got hit really hard this year, and I think we experienced that. But the United States didn't have any hurricane hits. So to us, we think of it as, oh, it wasn't that bad of a hurricane year. Some of the methods that they calculate how strong these are, the ACE model, it's like the aggregated energy from hurricanes, they can measure that. Actually, we're pretty high this year, and this is the first year in a while that we've had 3 Category 5 hurricanes. Thankfully, they were all in the open waters of the Atlantic or the Caribbean, not affecting the United States. So it was. I think some folks think, oh, higher than average years, that means the United States is going to get hit. We still had a pretty active year for hurricanes. We just didn't have the destruction that a lot of the big news media companies can show on TV and things of that from that. You went to fish storm, doesn't really affect many people. Maybe the cruise lines have to detour out of their way.
I like fish storm.
Yeah.
Good term. Okay, one more question.
This is not a question, but I just appreciate your post on Facebook, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Great to end on.
All right, Jacob, thank you
All right,
very
thank you
much.
so much.